about this combination of the use of the brain, mind, and muscles to help people achieve peak performance. I'm not surprised that this morning you have close to 100, maybe more participants because it's holiday time. That reflects the great interest and the relevance of this theme. And of course, in particular, they want to hear from the experts who are doing some very pioneering work about neuroscience, neurophysiology, and TM. So, and of course, this fluid motion factor. So, Mohan, I'll pass the floor to you immediately because everyone is eager to listen to all of you. Please take over, Mohan.
Yes, so good morning, Malaysia, and good evening to the United States. I think we have quite a turnout today. We got some people from Europe and one from Indonesia, a couple from Indonesia, and so on. So let's get the show on the road. Now, I'm going to speak for 15 minutes, and then I'm going to lead into Steven here, who is fresh in the series. I believe we're going to launch a series. So what I'm going to start out is I will introduce myself. I'm a professor at HELP University, the ELM Graduate School, which stands for Entrepreneurship, Leadership, and Management. I'm also adjunct faculty at MIU, where Fred teaches as a professor. We are here in Iowa, which is cold, and it's a safe environment. And as I said before, we are in a safe campus, and it's good to see all of you again. Now, I want to start by, I'll cut to the chase. I'm going to start with the fluid motion factor, and I don't fully know about the fluid motion factor, but I do know about peak performance. I want to start on the basis of the inspirational aspects of peak performance from the kind of ancient literature, as well as the more modern kind of memes that we see floating around on the internet, on social media, movies, popular culture, and so on. And then I want to shift to the research work done by the Gallup organization. And they've been doing this for about 15 years. They've been accumulating a lot of data from millions of managers. I say that again. They claim to have collected data from millions of managers in the strengths literature. And they have a psychometric tool called the Strengths Finder. I say this because I teach talent management and I teach selection and placement, which is derived from industrial organization psychology. It has a very scientific approach in terms of reliability and validity of instruments. And we've been looking at the Gallup Strengths Finder, and some of my students have done very well. They report back in their careers, some are mid-careers. And it comes very close to what we're talking about tonight in terms of peak performance, in terms of doing what is natural, what is effortless, and it's nourishing. The only missing dimension in that literature, as with other peak performance approaches, is they don't have a treatment, if you will, a dimension of what is the connection between silence and dynamism, between rest and activity. So nonetheless, they have been able to identify the same symptoms on a behavioral level and an experiential level in terms of what Fred is going to talk about. And a lot of what Fred, I believe, is going to share with us tonight is going to be from his book, World Class Brain with Dr. Harold Harung. And there, I think he does a more balanced exposition, a more kind of rounded, a fuller exposition of rest and activity, silence and dynamism. So the other approaches tend to focus on the convergent symptoms of peak performance, fluency, creativity, spontaneity, but they have this missing dimension of the knower and restfulness, the silence aspect. So now I'm going to just go straight into my slides on the general memes of peak performance. I'm going to start with some popular quotes. We can start from literature, and this first one is from the ancient Chinese literature of Lao Tzu. He says that man, when he overloads himself, when he kind of struggles with nature, it's because he's overloaded his brain. He sees the separation from the support of nature as interfering with the flow that comes with being connected with nature, and not overloading the brain. The second aspect, it goes a bit more deeply into the connection with the natural world. And this is called Wu Wei. And I said before, I have Chinese students from China. And oftentimes when we talk about overcoming stress with our innate capacity to manage stress, they will in chorus reply Wu Wei in a very delightful way. So I believe it's kind of very strongly ingrained in the culture, even though they have a different political system now in China, a more modern system. Somehow it's an ancient culture of 5,000 years old, and it's not going to go away anytime soon. It seems to trigger that kind of a collective memory. So here Lao Tzu kind of shares with us his deep insight that mistakes are made when we overload the brain again and separate ourselves from the supporting network of natural laws. So we connect with nature, we align with natural law. So it's nice to know that such an ancient wisdom is something that we will be revisiting tonight with modern science, with the latest research from psychology and neuroscience. And again, from another piece of ancient literature, this time from India, the Bhagavad Gita. This is actually a battlefield.
Sorry, Dr. Mohan.
We're not seeing your slides.
Is your slides up?
Yeah, I think, hang on, I have a connection problem. I'm going to start again. No. Sorry about that. Hang on a minute. I think my voice might not carry. Let me do that. Did you see it?
Now we see your slides, yes.
Okay.
I
have to
this is your desktop.
Okay, I'm going to start over. All right, so I'm going to start over. Sorry about that. I can see the red line around my screen that tells me I'm sharing. Okay, and this again is from Lao Tzu, the ancient literature of China. As I was saying, it's basically when you go against nature, when you lose the connection with nature, when your brain is overloaded, you begin to struggle by thinking too much, by this interference. That's basically when we start to make mistakes. A very beautiful ancient theme, which seems to echo even in modern times when we are, in the rat race, as some people say. The principle of Wu Wei means basically in activity, there is a flow. As we shall see later tonight, there is an underlying dimension which is often missed, even when we talk about Wu Wei, which is silence, restfulness, right? So again, he kind of reiterates the same theme. Mistakes are made when we separate from nature. We operate on the principle of minimal effort or effortlessness. Again, it's about aligning to natural law, right? And not trying too hard. When we are supported by nature, we don't struggle. I think that's pretty clear. I'm just going to move on. Again, now this is where I was told that I was not sharing my screen. So this is a nice ancient painting of a battlefield about 5,000 years ago in India, the famous war in the Bhagavad Gita. And this is Krishna counseling Arjuna. Now, this is a battlefield. This is not a counseling room. And Arjuna is not on a couch. He's at war. Right in the thick of battle, there's this session going on between Krishna and Arjuna. And here he teaches him the wisdom of skill in action. Basically establish in being, perform action. This is the same as Wu Wei in the Tao. All right, I'm just going to give you a few moments to reflect on the beautiful painting, and we move on. So from modern times, we now begin to see the kind of how this kind of lively intuition of this connection between our mind and body, where consciousness underpins the mind and body, this intimate connection of mind and body. So even in modern times, in the rush of the modern world with all the challenges, we now have COVID, there are glimpses that there's an underlying field of consciousness which connects the mind and body. And we see, for example, in this very popular meme, which I often, I follow Formula One, and oftentimes I hear the Formula One, the F1 drivers talking about how at some point they experience consciousness expansion. Ayrton Senna, the F1 driver from Brazil, the late driver, he often would describe it's transcendental. He would not be consciously manipulating the car. He would just have to let go. He needed to have the courage to let go. The same happened when recently, 2 weeks ago at the Bahrain Grand Prix, when 7 times world champion Lewis Hamilton was diagnosed with a positively COVID-19, and so he had to be out of the race, and so they had a replacement driver who was struggling, and then the driver was counseled by both the team manager and the CEO of the racing team of Mercedes that just let go and take breaths as he would place himself in the cockpit of the race car and just feel the environment and to just let go. And sure enough, he did very well. Even to his own surprise, he had a lap record. So again, this is something that seems to be coming up again and again, right? So let's just watch a video. There's a visceral connection between mind and body. You feel every aspect of the car.
I am a growing force without the motion. A glass of water longing for the ocean.
I'm not sure that's race
I
car
have
driving.
the fire burning desperately, but you're controlling me. Release me.
Okay, I'm a Saab fan, and there was a demonstration that people went to the White House to ask Obama to save Saab, but Saab is gone, as you know. But it showed Saab was a brand that people would say you either get it or you don't. And people who drive Saab say that there's a very visceral connection. They see the car as an extended part of their nervous system. They feel everything. All right, I'm just going to move on. And this is from the movie Ford versus Ferrari, the famous American driver, Carroll Shelby, right, who won the Le Mans 24 hours enduro. He describes the same thing. At 7,000 RPM, something happens. Let's watch.
7,000 RPM. That's where you made it.
Sound.
I asked you a question. The only question that matters. Who are you?
So basically, all that's left is a body moving through space and time. Now, let's revisit these experiences. I'm going to move on. Now, this is the famous Billie Jean King. And she, I think Fred does discuss her with Harold in his book, World Class Brain. And she was, I think, 5 or 6 times #1 in terms of tennis, the #1 seed. She won Wimbledon, and she is an activist, fighting for gender equality, civil rights, and so on. And she has had these glimpses of peak experience. Now, we will need to understand the difference between peak experience and peak performance. The difference is peak performance is basically the experience becomes stabilized. It becomes a platform of expression, what we call cosmic consciousness. We are maintaining this silence and dynamism beyond just that of an experience that comes and goes, but it becomes permanent. Now, I'm not going to play this video because I need to move on a little, but I can share my slides later on. All right, so here's again a description from her where she's describing that when she's playing a very dynamic, and of course, this is a very intense game. I don't mean to make it sound frivolous, but this is a very, very intense game, a competitive game. And I think Stephen will kind of embellish what we're saying and what we're seeing tonight. She is performing her absolute best, but somehow it becomes playful. She's observing, she's witnessing. Now, bear in mind, again, this is a very intense game, and she has an audience. In fact, the whole world is watching. But there's a sense of euphoria, and then she's kind of transmitting that to the audience. So again, this is something which is very, very, very much very powerfully subjective. It's almost like an artist expressing themselves. Now, we'll come back to this theme later on tonight. All right, that's basically it. Now I'm going to shift gears, and I'm going to go into the strengths research and what is being practiced in this. Now, I'm going to be very quick because I want to take this up in terms of Q&As, and I think that'll be much more useful. So just a quick overview would do at this point in time. Strengths are basically spontaneous. They seem to come out oftentimes just with a trigger, And if you ask people, how did you do that? How did you perform that activity? They will say, I don't seem to think. It just seems to come out. And I really don't know how I did it. Very, very common description. When you are performing your strengths or when you're learning your strengths, it seems to be learned very quickly, very rapidly. It's effortless, it's energizing, and you seem to want to pursue it to its excess. Again, something to revisit when we come back. Strengths are natural. They're not contrived. They seem to be randomly accessible, non-linear. You seem to be drawn towards it. And then you realize instinctively, this must be something I'm given. It's a gift. Okay? Beautiful. Then when you are in life, when you are in kind of fortuitous kind of moments in your life, when you seem to think, how did I come across this person? You know, this coincidences seem to be more than just random. And this is not just happenstance. I seem to be lucky. What is the operational definition for being lucky? Well, we can say that we are exposing ourselves to the appropriate social networks because we are now, we are much more self-aware, we are confident, we know what we're good at, so we will choose to be in environments that will support it. So naturally, the probability of getting support will be higher. Now, we can rationalize this very well, but I do think there's a subtle layer that's actually invisible and somehow kind of like a magnet drawing us to where there's good fortune. So many of my students, many people describe this. They say that it seems to happen more than just like a coincidence. It seems to be, now we can say, well, it appears that way is because you're thinking about it that way. I think it's just that you're exposing yourself volitionally to the right environment. Maybe so, but sometimes it's very hard to explain away rationally how things can just turn materialize to what we call being lucky. Simply because you are very self-aware, simply because you're very confident using that self-awareness, your gifts or your strengths, then that seems to draw everything that's favorable your way. Right, so the satisfaction. I should have had my students get rid of that. Okay, now I'm just going to go back to how we manage strengths. It's not just good enough amongst ourselves. We need to listen carefully to our yearnings, telling us what we love, and also amongst our team members. We encourage, we harness, we nourish, and think of others in terms of strengths. Now, the many big organizations, Accenture, my old firm, is actually practicing a strengths-based recruitment. This goes against the grain of the traditional paradigm of people must be flexible, you must learn to compensate for their weakness. We're saying, no, no, no. Focus on your strengths, develop your strengths. I see this is what we call dharmic, the Sanskrit word that means tuning into natural law, following your natural abilities. Right? So don't waste your energy on things we are weak in. So you subcontract that. Watch for satisfactions. Let go of slow learning. That means it's your weakness. And be sensitive and record. Have a diary, have a journal, right? And know this is what is right for you. Have the courage to reject something that is not your strength. Do not pursue a weakness. All right, so now there are 8 steps to identifying weakness while I'm on the subject. Again, this comes from empirical research. When you are defensive about your performance, you blame others. You're obsessive, you then become addicted to substance abuse. You justify your lack of performance, your addictions, right? You experience slow learning. It's a drudgery. You don't benefit from this experience. That means you are stuck in your weakness. Now, a few more aspects here. When you have to go through the steps in learning a weakness, typically what happens is you have to think step by step. It's very tedious, as opposed to learning a strength where there's rapid learning, very spontaneous. Learning a weakness is very, very tedious. You have to consciously think through each step. Whereas in the case of a strength, it's very spontaneous. You are able to express fluency very, very quickly. It's like the mind is in parallel processing. It doesn't have to be conscious of every step, right? Now, another symptom of a weakness is confidence basically takes a nosedive. It's very, very debilitating. And here's this very interesting symptom. If you cannot visualize yourself in the future, that means you are not practicing your strength. You're practicing your weakness. If I ask people, can you see yourself 5 years from now? What will you be doing? If they are cognizant of their strengths and they are performing their strengths, they will say, without even telling me, their minds will kick in this imagination that I'll be doing this, I'll be doing that, I'll be in this environment, I like to do this. Very, very natural, very easily, very effortlessly it seems to come. Now, in the case of weakness, you find that you can't. It's a blank. And you have to almost like force yourself, maybe I should think of it this way, that way. So it's not actually being triggered, right? So that's a major indication of not being in your strengths. Now, of course, the most obvious and most undesirable is burnout. We see that a lot. Now, I need to now bring it all into a kind of a balanced perspective. The number one response we get is that, Mohan, look, we are in an environment where we have to be flexible. My boss tells me I have to do this. I cannot just focus on my strengths. We are short-handed. And all that is true. I hear you, right? But it seems like we can invest in the culture has also been such that we have been socialized even from our child rearing habits and even in terms of our educational institutions. They are telling, as the book by Clifton and Nelson, the founder of the Gallup organization, say, we are trying to teach pigs how to sing or fish how to fly. It's not natural, And again, this is something that is looking at what is natural. It's nature over nurture. The nurturant aspect brings out what is hardwired in nature. Now, if we did this en masse, the belief system here suggests that the world will be better, more orderly, right? So we focus on an aptitude. Strengths are an aptitude, spelled with an APT. And the first step would be to know what we're good in, what we love to do, not doing what we love. I can ask you a question. Is there a subtle difference between loving what you do and doing what you love? Well, here's the answer. Doing what you love means you don't have to think about it. Loving what you do means there's a tad of adaptation. I have to get to love this. I have to change my attitude just a little. No, that's not your strength. When you practice your strengths, you don't even have to tell yourself that I like this or I love this. You just do it. You jump out of bed every morning. Now, what's missing from here, while there's rich psychometrics and quite a strong substantiation in terms of reliability and validity, again, as I said before, it's proprietary. But they are a reputable organization, and I think you can collaborate with them. But what's missing is the dimension of restfulness. And restfulness is basically where I think we will discuss more tonight, the paradigm of restful alertness, or which is where we are coming from in terms of both Fred and Steven, where we transcend and experience silence, and then that silence is brought into dynamism. And when peak performance transforms peak experience to something of permanence, we call it cosmic consciousness, skill in action, or Wu Wei, right? So there's now what is very promising as we connect the dots in psychology and neuroscience, and Fred will talk about this, is DMT. I am totally very, very, very blown by DMT, which is the default mode network. And Fred will explain that very well. What that simply means for the layperson is that given half the chance or a fraction of the chance, the mind and body will settle down. And in its own nature, they are fully awake and the potential is very, very lively. So this is not a contrived state, as the neuroscience points out, the EEG in terms of frequencies and amplitude. Performance is very, 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 very great. And the best part of it is there's restfulness. Now, why we are not in this state is another good question. And I think the culprit here is stress, right? So this is where I think the TM literature, in terms of the internal consistency of the Vedic literature and the external validation in terms of the empirical research, shows that peak experience can be transformed into peak performance, the permanence of cosmic consciousness, when silence and dynamism are infused, so that when you are enlightened. There is no difference between silence and dynamism. You could be in a battlefield, you could be in a sports arena, you could be driving a car at 200 miles an hour, you experience silence within you, right? And best of all, it's effortless. It's not strenuous, right? So I'm now going to slide to our good friend here, Steven Yellin, who is actually a golf coach. He works with PGA, that means professional professional golfers in America. He's worked with 12 universities, I believe, many schools. He has many decades of experience. He's the author of a few books, and he has taken this knowledge and experience and crafted an approach called fluid motion. So Steven, over to you. I'm going to unshare. I think it's already unshared. Okay, unshare.
So you're muted, Steven. There we go.
Okay, here we go. We're good?
We're good.
So I want to say that, Mohan, that was a brilliant, brilliant introduction to what we're going to be talking about tonight. Very comprehensive, very thorough, very complete, and very true. So congratulations to you on that. And then I would like to say that it's always a great honor for me to share the stage with Dr. Frederick Travis, who is not only a world-class researcher into peak performance, but a world-class friend of mine as well. His work is very, very.
Muy bien, muy bien.
Dr. Chan, you need to mute. Good, Steven. So you're muted again, sir.
His work is absolutely world class and actually made a very profound impact on my program, because just to give you a brief introduction, I discovered something many, many years ago to teach athletes how to produce fluid motion. You'll hear about it extensively. I knew it worked, but I didn't know why it worked. And after extensive conversations with Dr. Travis, I know why it works now. So without further ado, I'll just jump into this. So I work with world-class athletes in many different sports, primarily in golf. And my athletic background is, I grew up in the great state of Florida, and my sport of choice was tennis. And I had a very successful career as a junior tennis player. I was Florida State High School singles champion at #1 singles, was a member of the championship team, went on to play #1 singles at University of Pennsylvania, was a member of the All-Ivy team. But then when I was a senior at the University of Pennsylvania in a challenge match, I had an experience that changed my life. It really, really did change my life. Now, I was sort of in the middle of the food chain of national junior and national collegiate tennis. I would go to the nationals every year, which is an honor in itself. I would win a couple rounds, but then someone would have Steven Yellin for breakfast, and Steven Yellin would go home. But in this match, this challenge match that changed my life, I experienced what the top players in the country, both as juniors and as collegiate players, felt. And the overriding experience was freedom, absolute freedom. I can do whatever I wanted to do, whenever I wanted to do it, and it was ridiculously simple and easy to do. And it felt very much like a spiritual experience. And it felt like a gift. It felt like a gift from nature, because every athlete, more than anything, wants to experience freedom in the midst of very strict boundaries. And it felt like a gift that nature had opened up its infinite reservoir of intelligence and said, okay, Steven, we're going to give you this experience that you have been looking for and all athletes have been looking for. and then we're going to close that portal, and then you have to figure it out. Well, of course, I was all in. I remember sitting down after the match. It's just a 1-hour match, and I couldn't move for 10 minutes. I was so overwhelmed with this experience. I had played so many hundreds of matches against so many different players, and again in so many different venues around the country. Why did I have this experience? What precipitated it? And I knew that my life was not going to be the same after this experience. I didn't know where it would lead. I didn't know how long it would lead me to, what the final destination would be. But I knew that my life was not going to be the same, and I was correct. Finally, I had to get up, go to class. I couldn't let go of it. I was on it 24/7. Why? Why did I have this experience, this unbelievable zone peak performance experience? And I thought about it from every conceivable angle for 2 or 3 days. Finally, on the third day, I woke up and I figured the whole thing out. I knew exactly why I had this experience. It was black and white. There was no gray area. And of course, it was well below the radar. It wasn't a surface explanation, or else I would have understood what was going on after the match. And I was 21 years old at the time. And I thought it would take me a year or two to come up with a program to at least give athletes, or I was just thinking of tennis at that point, I wasn't even playing golf, that at least give them the opportunity to move in the direction of at least becoming more consistent, if not having these zone experiences. Well, ladies and gentlemen, in Malaysia and all over the world, it did take a few years. It took a lifetime. And the reason why it took a lifetime is that arena from which zone experiences are generated from is a very subtle arena. There are very specific laws of motion. And the fascinating thing is that when an athlete has a zone experience in tennis or golf or basketball or soccer or football, they are experiencing identical processes in the mind. The mind is the motherboard. Sports is all about motion. Motion is all about the muscles. Well, where's the operating system of the muscles? It's in the brain physiology. And just like the heart works one way, the kidneys work one way, the lungs work one way, well, guess what? And this is the deep understanding that Dr. Travis gave me, and I'm so grateful for this, is that fluid motion is produced identically regardless of the motion and regardless of the athlete who's producing it and regardless of the skill level. And this is an enormous, enormous discovery as far as I'm concerned, because if you go to a cardiologist in Kuala Lumpur, or you go to a cardiologist in Sydney, Australia, they're going to tell you the same thing about the heart. There's not a different understanding in the cardiologist in Kuala Lumpur versus Sydney, Australia. No, this is the same playing field from which zone experiences are generated. So let's dive deep into those processes now. So in order to generate a motion, any motion, whether it's hitting a golf ball or walking across the street, you have to generate a signal in the brain, an electrical signal, or else the club's not going to move, or your feet are not going to move. Now, there's two parts of the brain that I'll initially talk about that are very interesting and crucial in producing fluid motion. One is the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is the front of the frontal part of the brain. It oversees all the processes in the brain. It's also called the CEO of the brain because it oversees everything that's going on. The other part of the brain is the motor system. Now, when someone produces a fluid motion golf shot, let's say, in that 1.5 seconds, the motion is very quick, 1.5 seconds and the swing is over. But during that 1.5 seconds, that intention bypasses the prefrontal cortex, which is also the discriminating intellect. Essentially, the intellect goes offline, goes right to the motor system, and it's the motor system which communicates with the body to produce motion. Now, the problem occurs, and it's a mighty big problem if you're a professional athlete, is when during that 1.5 seconds, the prefrontal cortex or the intellect goes online, and it intercepts or delays that signal in moving effortlessly and seamlessly to the motor system. Then in the middle of the motion, the body is looking for direction from the mind, because after all, that's the motherboard. And there's too many processes going on in the mind. There's too many processes going on in the mind. And that's when the bulkier core muscles dominate the motion, and you can't sync the swing. You also can't self-correct the swing. So this good process, which is a universal process, it's not Steven Yellin's process. The fluid motion factor was not invented by Steven Yellin. Steven may be very clever, but he's not the creator. This good process, when the signal goes right to the motor system and bypasses the prefrontal cortex, I have labeled, actually I didn't label it, my father did, bless his soul. He said, Steven, why don't you call it the fluid motion factor, because that's what produces fluid motion. So for golfers, there are many different ways that teachers teach a golf swing. There's many different ways a golfer swings the club, many variations, but guess what? Guess what? There's only one way you can produce fluid motion. That prefrontal cortex has to go offline. That signal has to effortlessly go and very quickly and seamlessly go to the motor system. And that's where and when zone experiences or peak performances are generated. Now, just to show you how universal this is, if you sat down with 100 athletes from different sports and you asked them to describe how they felt when they played their best, you can divide their responses into 3 categories. And if you're an athlete out there, whoever's listening, see if you can relate to this, okay? Here's the first category. Time slows down. I have all the time in the world. I have the club up here in that 1.5 seconds it takes to swing a golf club. It feels like it's moving so slow, I feel like I can go to McDonald's, get a Big Mac, come back, and I'll still find the slot on the way down. Well, time, the experience of time, and this knowledge that I'm giving you, this is from Dr. Fred Travis, okay? So let's give unto Caesar what is due unto Caesar here. That the experience of time is controlled by neurons in the prefrontal cortex and neurons in the motor system. Now, when the prefrontal cortex or the intellect goes online, the neurons in the prefrontal cortex will overshadow the neurons in the motor system, and you have to experience time moving quickly. No one shoots a 65 in a professional golf tournament, walks off the course and says, hey, everything was rushed out there. Well, what do they say? What do you say in your own individual sport? I had all the time in the world. Well, you have to, because if time is rushed, by definition, the prefrontal cortex went online. The second thing they'll say is, I wasn't thinking. Don't ask me what I did. I'm not too sure what I did. Well, the prefrontal cortex is the intellect. And when it goes online, you're going to remember every single detail. No one shoots a 65, walks off the course and says, hey, coach, hey, ESPN, I was thinking a lot out there. What do they say? I don't know what I did. I just sort of pressed the button and boom, I'm off to the races. Now, I'll tell you 3 stories that exemplify this. The first is from Tiger Woods' DVD called Tracking the Tiger. And he says, I'm quoting, there have been key shots in major tournaments where I took the club out of the bag and I didn't remember anything until I saw the ball land on the green. Oh, slow down, Tiger. You've got the commentators and you've got the audience saying, look at Tiger's focus, look at his concentration, look at his determination. What is Tiger's inner experience? I don't remember anything. It's just the opposite, 180 degrees opposite of what you thought. When Bubba Watson won the Masters, the most prestigious tournament in the world, held every year at Augusta, they asked him, Bubba, what were you thinking on the last 9 holes on Sunday? He said, I don't remember anything about the last 4 holes. This is you win the Masters. Your life has changed. You are already in a Hall of Fame kind of career. It's you have a lifetime exemption to play in the Masters, and you will always be known as the Masters champion. And what did Bubba say? Oh, I don't remember anything. Oh, really, Bubba? That's not what we were thinking when we were watching you on TV. When Maria Sharapova, the Russian tennis player, upset Serena Williams about 17 years now ago in the finals of Wimbledon, the biggest upset in the history of Wimbledon. This little 17-year-old skinny girl, Russian girl, takes down Serena Williams, probably the greatest women's tennis player, and the biggest upset in Wimbledon history. When they asked Maria, how did you just pull off the greatest upset in the history of Wimbledon? You know what her response was? I have no idea. The prefrontal cortex was completely offline. Now, I want to talk about muscle memory, or motion memory, if you want to call it, because it's important to understand this. Muscle memory is like saving money in a savings account. Let's say you want to save $10,000. So you go to the bank, you open up an account, you start putting your money in. You put $100 here, $500 here. Finally, you have your $10,000. Now, you go to the bank on Tuesday, your money is there. You go to the bank 2 years from now, your money is there. You go to the bank 5 years from now, your money has not gone anywhere. This is exactly how muscle memory operates. When someone has grooved the motion, meaning they have practiced the motion enough, we're not talking about beginners, we're not talking about intermediate players, we're talking about someone who has grooved a motion. They don't have to be a professional athlete to groove a motion, but everyone knows when they've grooved their motion, and everyone can see when a grooved motion is in operation. When they groove their motion, Fred Travis, my dear friend Dr. Travis, told me something about this 15 years ago. When he told me this, there was a nuclear explosion in Stevie's brain. He said, once you have grooved the motion cannot break down. What breaks down is the ability to access it. But accessing what you already own is the slipperiest slope in sports. It defines a career. It defines complete careers. And I'll give you an example. Let's say a very accomplished professional golfer is going to play in a big tournament. So he goes to the range before his tee time. He drops a bucket of balls. He gets to his driver. Now, let's say the natural shape on his driver is just a very soft right to left. It's called a draw. Ball goes very slightly right to left. So he hits 12 or 13 really acceptable drives. He'll take any one of those drives during the round. Maybe 2 or 3 are spectacular, but he'll take any one. 23 minutes later, he tees it up at the first tee. He looks out to the fairway. Well, it's not a right to left hole. It's a left to right hole. Uh-oh. He's playing with 3 other players who hit the ball and they hit the ball so far, he's saying, this is ridiculous how far they hit the ball. Okay. Uh-oh. He played the same tournament last year, and he hit his tee drive OB, out of bounds. He had to tee it up again. Uh-oh. He always wants to feel that when he has his opening drive, if it's a solid drive, he has a good chance that he's going to play well that day. Uh-oh. So he tees it up. Then in the middle of his swing, right at the top, in the transition, because you're changing direction of the club, that's the crucial moment in the swing, he goes to the teller at the muscle memory bank. And he says, look, I just want to withdraw one of those 10 or 12 very acceptable drives that I hit 23 minutes ago. And the teller says, and of course this conversation is going on in nanoseconds, the teller says, "Oh, Mr. Yellin, we are so delighted you're playing in this tournament, but you have violated the rules of the bank. So you don't have access to your $10,000 or those 10 or 12 very acceptable drives that you hit 23 minutes ago. You only have access to $2,900. So you don't hit one of those 10 or 12 drives that you would take all day long. You pop up some pathetic drive that's 35 yards in back of the shortest drive." Now, if this player, this Mr. Yellin character, was to turn around 180 degrees and hit a ball into the parking lot, folks, where there's no fairway, there's no course, there's no tournament, how many times do you think he would make a bad move on that ball? He would always make a good move on that ball. So if the swing is broke going this way, it's going to be broke going this way, but it's not broke. He violated the rules of the bank. And I'm going to talk about the rules of the bank in a minute. But fortunately, there are limited rules of the bank, meaning there are limited ways that you can shut down your ability to not only be consistent, but to have any chance, zero, of having a zone experience or a peak performance that day. Because remember, just like the heart works one way, fluid motion is produced the same way. The heart breaks down a certain way. It doesn't break down. It could break down different ways, okay? But everyone can experience that. It's not, well, this person's heart broke down. I've never seen that before. No. So fluid motion is produced identically. Zone experiences are produced identically. Okay, one more little presentation here. I hope you're enjoying it because I'm enjoying talking about it, all right? So everyone has a mind and everyone has a body. It's called the mind-body connection. And you can say the mind is like an ocean. There are surface levels of the ocean, very choppy, very active. The same thing with the mind. You can be thinking, you can be analyzing, you can be doing all kinds of mental gymnastics. But the mind, just like an ocean, the mind is like an ocean. It has deeper, quieter, more silent levels. Now the body has the same scheme. The body has the gross, bulkier core muscles, level of the muscles of the body, which are very important for emotion. But if they dominate the motion, it's going to be anything but fluid. There's no chance of having any zone experiences when that happens. But the body also has deeper levels of intelligence. And before I tell you what this connection, I just want to, which I forgot to do, I just want to tell you the third experience these athletes have when they have zone experiences, when they play their best. Remember, I gave you 1 and 2. I left out 3. So I'm going to give you 3. The motion was smooth and effortless. I didn't even feel the club move. Well, the motor system is comprised of 3 parts, but the real genius is the cerebellum. You have to understand the cerebellum in order for me to describe what I'm about to describe. The cerebellum does 2 things. One, it tracks where emotion is, where it is, and where it has to be in order to be successfully completed. And then it has the ability to self-correct. So if you're at the top of the swing and you know it doesn't feel good, if you've accessed the correct use of the cerebellum will liquefy the body enough to make sure that that club is square at impact, so you're still in that shot. If you haven't accessed the correct use of the cerebellum, you have to make a perfect move on the ball because the body has no self-correcting mechanisms going on. There's no self-correcting mechanisms going on. The second thing the cerebellum does, it smooths out emotion. You can divide emotion into a million parts, but when you see someone have this really silky, absolutely silky, oily kind of motion, that's the cerebellum smoothing it out. Now, let's get back to the mind-body connection because it's important that I mention this. So you have surface levels of the mind, surface levels of the body, deeper levels of the mind, deeper levels of the body. Now here's the secret sauce. And this sauce is missing from sports instruction. This sauce has its origin very much so in my many talks with Dr. Fred Travis. So when you generate an intention during that 1.5 seconds, or someone's going in to score a goal, how quickly is that? That the foot moves back and then the foot moves forward and then it's over. When you generate an intention from a quieter, softer, deeper level of the mind, you have no choice but to access the deeper level of intelligence of the body. But when you generate an intention from a surface level of the mind, which means that the mind, the intellect is very active, you have no choice, but you don't have a choice. You can only access the surface level of intelligence of the body. So when someone has his own experience, excuse me, when someone has his own experience in whatever sport, regardless of how they got there, it doesn't matter how they did it, as long as they do it, they are generating intentions from a quieter, deeper level of the mind, so they have access to a deeper level intelligence of the body. When that same athlete who had his own experience, could be the best he's ever played, goes out the next day and he can't even find the fairway. I mean, it is ridiculous. He's saying to himself, how can I play so well one day and so miserably the next day? He was generating the intentions from this level of the mind, so he only had access to this level of the intelligence of the body. So my program, which took a long time to develop, a really long time, teaches athletes how to set up the conditions that they normally experience by chance. It's just by chance that athlete that day was able to generate their intentions from this level of the mind. There is no systematic way they did it. They're certainly not practicing it, and I guarantee you they don't understand the dynamics. They know that space. They're familiar with that space, but they don't know how to get there. They're just hoping that it shows up. Well, it shouldn't be like that, because if you have your $10,000, you worked hard to earn that $10,000. How would you like to have $10,000 in your bank account? You want to withdraw some money, you want to withdraw $8,000, and the teller says, I'm so sorry, Mr. Yellin, Dr. Travis, Dr. Mohan, you only have $2,900 available to you. Well, no, I know I have $10,000. I saved the money. Well, I'm sorry, today you only have access. This is when an athlete goes south. We have this expression, going south, meaning that he's not doing, it's no bueno. Well, I don't know if you understand Spanish, but that means no good. So these rules of the bank, I mentioned these rules of the bank, that when you violate a rule of the bank, it doesn't matter if you have $10,000, it doesn't matter if you have $10 billion, you will not have access to that money, because there's very specific processes in the brain physiology that allows you to access your muscle memory. And if you violate those laws of motion, those laws of nature, whether you intellectually understand them or you don't, whether you believe them or you don't, it doesn't matter. You're not going to boil water at 212 degrees Fahrenheit, 100 degrees centigrade. Whether you believe it's going to boil, no, I believe it's going to boil at 90 degrees centigrade. Well, it really doesn't matter. It's a law of nature. So we're talking about very specific laws of nature. And there's one major violation of the bank. The brain physiology, in order to produce fluid motion, in order to access your $10,000, has to operate in a very specific environment. This is the same environment for every athlete producing any motion. And that environment can be summarized in one word: wholeness. The brain physiology was designed by the Creator to generate fluid motion and generate peak performances, whether it's on the athletic field or it's in life or it's in an office. as I believe Dr. Travis will talk about a little bit, when it experiences an environment of wholeness. Now, what is wholeness? I'll just give you a brief description and then I'll conclude, because I even know when I'm talking a lot. Okay, I hope you're finding it interesting. Is that, and this is a definition of wholeness for a golfer. So when a golfer is behind a golf ball and he's setting up his shot, he takes into consideration many different elements of the shot. He's looking at the lie. He's looking at the wind. He's looking at the temperature. He's looking at what club he's going to hit, how he's going to, how he's going to hit it, how aggressive, where he is in the round. He could be looking at where he is in his life, because it could be a pivotal shot in his life. So he takes all of these elements and let's say he's going to make a golf smoothie. We've all made smoothies, right? We put a banana, raspberry, strawberry. Well, if we hit the blend button, and after we hit the blend button with all this fruit, and we see the outline of a banana, well, we don't really have a smoothie. So we're going to make a golf smoothie. We'll take all these parts, could be 5, 6, 7, 10 parts, and we're going to put it in a golf smoothie. Now, before that golfer, he's over the ball, he's about to pull the trigger. If he doesn't make a smoothie, meaning that there is not one element of the shot that is pulsating over any other element. Don't hit it left, don't hit it right, don't hit it long, don't hit it short. Get the club in this position. If that is pulsating over any other element of the shot, he has broken wholeness. He has weakened the mind. The mind is weakened when it doesn't experience an environment of wholeness. Now, if wholeness is broken, this is for all sports. You can talk about this in all sports, because there's always a pause in motion in sports. If wholeness is broken before he pulls the trigger, what chance do you think he has of experiencing a threshold level of wholeness during the swing? Guess what? He's playing poker at the Bellagio in Las Vegas, and he doesn't know what card he's going to get. Because once you weaken the brain physiology and the cerebellum has to operate in an environment of wholeness. Once you weaken the cerebellum's ability to experience wholeness, you are doing crisis management during that swing, because you're limited to any kind of self-correction that could take place. So with that, I will conclude my part of my presentation, and I thank all the sponsors of this for inviting me, and I hope you found it interesting.
Okay, Fred, before I invite you to speak, please remember we don't have much time left. Would you mind restricting your presentation to about 15 minutes so that we have some Q&A?
Yes, that's important to do, Dr. Chen. So let me begin. That was excellent, Stephen. That was great. Notice what he's done. Stephen has deeply understood our motor system, how we move the body, deeply understood the critical thinking part of the brain, and realized they have to be separate. And what his techniques do is allow that to happen so you can use the fluid motion, which is very natural. Some people ask, how do we do this in the management situation? How do we do this in the business environment? This is what I want to talk about. At the end, Stephen was mentioning what is the environment, what is the context within which the fluid motion factor unfolds, and that's of wholeness. So this is what I'm going to be looking at. This is what our research is focused on, is how can we gain peak performance in all areas of life, in all fields. This is work I've done with Dr. Harung. We've looked at athletes, managers, and musicians. And what the research tells us is if you want to be successful, education explains about 1% of peak performance. If you have an MA, a PhD, it doesn't guarantee that you're going to have peak performance. Work experience is 3%. You can be working for a year, 10 years. Age, 0%. Peak performance isn't a function of how old you are. Amount of practice for profession such as managers, it's 1%. Music, sports, it's 12%. Monetary incentives actually decrease job performance. This is from work that Schmidt and Hunter have done. It's a while back, but it was looking at over 10,000 individuals. So what explains peak performance? What we see here is 2 books that I've written with Harold, Excellence Through Mind-Brain Development, World-Class Brain. And the title is the answer. It's mind-brain development. Mind-brain development, we have 3 components. One is your level of brain integration. What's the quality of functioning of the brain overall? Second is individual development of your skills. Third is frequency of peak performance. And these, together with the social context, determine peak performance. And this is answering the question, how you can have world-class performance, quote-unquote, fluid motion factor in the boardroom. So we'll be looking at these. First, brain integration. Imagine you're at a fine orchestra and they're warming up. The noise is incredible. Conductor puts down the baton, everyone acts together, and all the individual output comes together into a whole. This is what brain integration does. It's measured by something called coherence. Coherence is looking at what's the electrical activity of different parts of the brain. You can see visibly that this electrical activity at the top is different from the bottom. One is slower and more spread out. This is more close together. That means those 2 parts of the brain are not working together. Now we see that the electrical activity is very similar from both parts. This is suggesting the brain is not isolated units competing with each other, but actually coordinating the output. Is this important? Smith did a research looking at connectivity using magnetic resonance imaging, over 1,000 individuals, and he found low connectivity in people's brains was characterized by anger, rule breaking, substance abuse, poor sleep quality. High connectivity, better vocabulary, memory, life satisfaction, and income. That's because the brain's the interface. If the interface is functioning more as a whole, more integrated, the output is going to lead towards greater success. Let's look at more reasoning, psychological development. In this case, we looked at individuals and we asked them, why is it correct to act in a specific way? Some people avoided, well, you have to avoid breaking rules because you're going to get caught. Or I follow the rules as long as they give me what I want. Middle level of more reasoning is where you live up to what other people expect of you, fulfill duties. Higher level of more reasoning and higher level of psychological development as you live a more principled life. Uphold obligations first. Follow self-chosen ethical principles. Now, is this just theoretical? No, it really affects your behavior. In this research by Latif and Bergen, they divided nurses into low, medium, and high moral reasoning. On the left is patient care. And they found the individuals whose moral reasoning was more developed actually did better at patient care, with patient counseling, screening records. On the right is nursing performance. Blue is number of correct warnings. Red is times they did not warn the patient. So the patient, something could be very dire and the nurse just doesn't want to tell it to the patient. Low moral reasoning, that's what they did. High moral reasoning, they always told. Whatever was the situation, they would sit down and they would explain it to the person. So these 2 points we see are important for performance. Now, peak performance. Mohan spoke about this. Steven spoke about this. Well, happy, fulfilling moments in life. Here's one description. I'll let you read it. Everything acts automatically. This is a fluid motion factor, which Steven talked about. This is a musician during performance. This isn't tied to her individual perspective, but her individual perspective expands out and her awareness actually includes the audience and she feels how the audience is responding to the orchestra. And it's not to her, It's to the whole orchestra, the whole sound. And this last one, experiencing a kind of eternity. And what we found is people reporting peak performance actually have more of these types of experiences. Now, let's talk about meditation, because meditation practice actually enhances all three factors. Meditation practice is a way to develop these three factors to develop peak performance. And when we talk about meditation, they're similar in that they explore the structure of conscious experience, i.e. they explore the object of experience. They can explore the process of experience, how am I relating to things around me, or they can explore the subject, the knower. Who am I? Who am I who is the background for all this information to fall and who's putting it together? Now, meditations have categories: focused attention, where you keep one experience in mind; open monitoring, where you watch all experiences pass through awareness. The effect of these meditations is to develop new ways to use your mind, new tools that you can use to cope with the world around you. There's a third category, automatic self-transcending, and this is any meditation that starts with thinking and allows you to experience more quiet, more expanded levels of experience of the self, and experience that part of you who's silent, awake, alert, quiet. And what this is doing, it's expanding consciousness. It's as though it's turning up the light by which we see the world. Analogy to understand these different types of meditation is: imagine you go into a kitchen, the chef greets you, chef teaches you how to hold the knife, how to cut different vegetables. The chef will also teach you how to sharpen the knife. Other meditations are like learning how to hold the mind, learning how to use the mind. Automatic self-transcending, and this is a category that transcendental meditation is in, actually sharpens awareness. Let's look at TM practice. Relative to stress, this is blood flow. During stress, the core of the brain is more active. This is leading to the passionate response. The front of the brain is less active. Under stress, you lose the ability to see the big picture. When you're resting, blood flow is down in both parts of the brain. You're just repairing the sleep activity. On the right is the experience transcending. During transcendental meditation practice, it's termed restful alertness. Notice the rest. The brainstem area is quiet. Breath is quiet, is softer. Heart rate is quieter. Internal mental content is reduced, but it's not an inert state like when we're sleeping. We're highly alert, as we see by increased blood flow in the front part of the brain. This is looking at coherence. Coherence we've talked about before. It's parts of the brain working together. We have different frequency bands here. That's the columns. Top is top of the brain. Bottom is front of the brain. A dot is where we record brain waves. A line between dots indicating level of coherence. If there's no line, coherence is less than 70. Very dark, as we see here in this alpha 1 frequency, 8 to 10 cycles per second. Very high, especially in the front of the brain. And the effect of having this experience during meditation is to bring it outside of meditation. And that's what brain integration is measuring. One of these, well, there's two different rows. Each row is a different person. One's been practicing TM for 6 months, one for 24 years. Which do you think is a long-term meditator? Oh, it's the top one. Notice how the brain patterns of transcending, of restful alertness, of inner expansion, of the big picture, of quietness is there along with focused activity. This is brain integration. Now, where else do we see brain integration? This would be my last slide. This is a work with Harang. We thought we should see it in world-class performers. We should see it in world-class performers because they're able to function under stress. They're able to cope with novelty. They're able to overcome difficulties. The world-class athletes were Olympic athletes, 66 in all, 33 world class, 33 athletes who competed but did not consistently place. We see higher levels of brain integration, as we just saw, growing with TM practice in the world class athletes. Top level managers, it's the same phenomenon. Top level managers, they were CEOs for 18 years or longer, their company had grown. Higher levels of brain integration compared to middle level managers. And when we talked with these managers, we asked them, what's your secret? Now, no one said that they're smarter or they worked harder. They said they can trust their inner intuition. And if they intuitively feel something, they do it. And they found that this can be a reliable guide. This is a very practical description of what does it mean to have higher levels of brain integration. What does it mean to have more contact with that part of ourselves which is whole and quiet and full? It's just that the mind is functioning in a much quieter way. These are classical musicians, professional and amateur, both have high levels of brain integration, giving rise to the importance of music for culturing the individual. My last two columns are short-term TM, 7 years, long-term TM, 24 years. I show this to you not to suggest that if you practice TM, you're going to be a great musician, manager, and athlete. But what I am presenting this to you is that transcending during TM practice is a way to exercise those parts of the brain that will let you be more successful. Exercise that level of brain functioning that will give you the context, that wholeness, so you can get maximum benefit from Steven's fluid motion factor. You'll know how to just sit in silence and allow the motor system to unfold. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to speak with you.
Fred.
Open for questions.
Very impressive. Now, this morning we have lots of insights, and what was presented is indeed very enlightening. There are some questions from the floor, but before I invite them, I want to ask one or two questions first. How strong is the scientific evidence to support the ideas such that we can say they have very strong predictability, the predictive power of your analysis, that if you apply your methods or method to an average person, we can be assured that he will succeed? Or we have to qualify and say that only some individuals have the predispositions to succeed?
Why don't you enter from
and
your
anyone of
point
you
of
can
view,
answer.
Steve? Stephen, why don't you enter from your point of view, then I'll answer from mine. Unmute. Yeah.
I've worked with all levels of. I've worked with all levels of athletes, from beginning, intermediate, to household names. People who have won. One professional golfer I worked with has won close to $30 million in prize money. Another one, $25 million in prize money. And I've worked with what are known as weekend warriors. They just go out, a couple times a month. And what I've found is that the brain physiology, when it's given the opportunity to settle down, it's universal success across the board, everybody. Now, of course, there's a higher level if you're a professional golfer versus, a weekend warrior. But what I've seen is that when I set up these conditions, which are set up very quickly and very simply, because it has to be simple, my program is very, very simple. But when they're set up universally, Dr. Chan, universally across the board, 100%, there is improvement. And it's very startling, because I'm not telling them to do something specifically mechanically. All I'm doing is setting up the condition for the mind to settle down. And as soon as the mind settles down and the flow of intelligence between the mind and the body becomes more powerful, then there's instant improvement. I'm not talking about a day or two or a week, or I'm talking about within 10 minutes. there's instant improvement, because when the cerebellum starts to work more efficiently, then the magic shows up for everyone, 100%, not 90%, 100% across the board.
Thank you. And in
Mohan,
terms
you
of
have
brain,
something to say?
in terms of brain integration, if I could add, we've noticed college students, 3 months TM practice, brain integration goes up in that time. Also, we find that practical intelligence develops. We looked at school administrators, again, 3 months practice, we see brain integration goes up, and then we also see decreased burnout, decreased perceived stress, and so on. Because we're working on the level of physiology, the effects are strong and across individuals.
Thank you. Mohan?
Can you unmute yourself, Mohan?
Mohan, we can't hear you.
All right, I just unmuted myself. It harks back to decades older research, going back to the 80s. In nursing homes, people, I said before in the last seminar we had, it was done in rural Massachusetts, done at Harvard with Skip. Fred and I used to know Skip, the late Skip Alexander, and Ellen Langer, who's still at Harvard. They found fluid intelligence, which is also another study done in Holland, I think in the later 70s. Fluid intelligence increasing amongst people who are not believed. From what we know in current psychological science, you can't increase fluid intelligence beyond the age of 23, 24. That means early 20s. It becomes frozen, stuck. It reaches a plateau. But we found people actually increasing in fluid intelligence. This is about 30 years ago in research. Now, there hasn't been much of a follow-up since then. I'm looking at that now because this is a longitudinal study. It's going to be difficult to set it up. But there was evidence of people who would be on the average level, because intelligence, for example, is on a normal distribution, right? It's an operational definition. And so that's not supposed to increase, because by the paradigm of what is supposed to be normal, you're not supposed to be able to increase it. That would be like super normal. But people were found to like bump up by 5 to 10 points. That's pretty amazing. And so, yes, it doesn't matter what the entry level capabilities are. We can ratchet up the intelligence quite disproportionately compared to other interventions. Fluid intelligence is much more desirable because it's the ability to learn new things, as opposed to content intelligence. That means what you know, crystallized intelligence. In our day and age, we need this because of obsolescence of knowledge. Other aspects, average ability is always a given. I think Fred's research shows there's a multimodal, multimodal increases, right? In terms of moral development, in terms of emotional intelligence. Now, emotional intelligence is something we need to get into. There was a question here from Victor. I think Victor's from Africa. If I know him correctly, he's one of my students, previous students. He was asking to see how these presentations we have had tonight would fit into Bloom's taxonomy. My simple response is both fluid motion and peak performance are hitting the higher levels of the taxonomy. That means evaluation and synthesis. And what's different, though, is that we're not thinking about it, as Stephen was explaining it very well. As I was explaining in my earlier presentation in terms of strengths, you ask people, how did you do that? They say, I don't know, it just came out. So it's fluid, there's a fluency, but it's spontaneous. And it's not consciously thinking through the steps, but nonetheless, Victor hits the higher levels. Synthesis, evaluation, and what's more, there is a kind of a refined appraisal. It seems like it's knocking on the doors of emotional intelligence, because appraisal is not just cognitive, it's also refined feeling. And all of this happens very spontaneously, actually very innocently, right? And this is what Fred was pointing to. People are experiencing this and describing the experience in terms of performance, not just an experience per se, but actually doing something. And if you ask them, how did you do that? Gee, I don't know. It just came out. Is that right, Stephen?
100%.
All right. So I hope that answers the question. The empirical evidence is there. What we're really trying to do tonight is not to take pieces of data out as slices in isolation. We're trying to put it together, and we're trying to connect the dots, if you will. And we see that it's pointing to a picture. Now, bear in mind, we're actually in a research paradigm which is very new. Even though the experiences have been around since ancient times, only now we have the ability in terms of psychological science, in terms of the instruments, as well as the methods of assessing validity. For example, meta-analysis. Schmidt, for example, was a professor of mine in the University of Iowa, just up the road. And that's looking at hundreds and hundreds of studies, doing a statistical review, and also in terms of psychophysiology, which Fred is doing. And we together, when we accumulate this data, we see that it's pointing to a picture, a holistic picture. It's not just pieces of data, discrete pieces of data in isolation. It's putting it together holistically. Why not? Because we are looking at holistic behavior. Therefore, it demands a holistic understanding of the hardware and the software, of the nervous system and the psychology. I'll hand this back to Fred. Yeah.
Fred, you wish to add more?
I added my point earlier about brain integration. That was very thorough, Mohan. Thank you.
Thank you. There is a gentleman by the name of Mark Gutenberg, I think. He wants to ask a question. Are you there, Mark?
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah, please ask.
Well, I didn't actually have a question. Did I put one? But I will come up with a question. I know Steven very well. I've worked with his program. I think it's fantastic. And I want to talk to you about a book I read 4 or 5 years ago, The Talent Code, when they talk about how the brain produces myelin and how the myelin strengthens the signal to the body. Where is that myelin originated from? What part of the brain?
It actually comes from your diet, Mark. What the myelin is, it's a fat, and the fat wraps around the output fibers, the axons. It's very much dependent on dietary fat. So if you don't have enough omega-3s in your diet, you'll find you'll have cognitive problems, motor problems, and so on. And the point about what the fat is doing is it's coordinating flow of information, because you have this quite expansive connectivity in the brain, and to actually perform a task, you have to coordinate the activity from near and far areas. And that's what myelin is doing. It's actually increasing, decreasing connections so that you can optimize when everything comes together.
Very good. Is any of that coming from the prefrontal cortex? Any of that signal generated from that part of the brain?
The myelin is universal. So it's the motor system, it's the back sensory system, it's the prefrontal cortex. The myelin is the general structure that the whole brain uses. What the prefrontal cortex is there for is originally just to set up the emotion. And once you set up the emotion, so the output from one subsection becomes the input for the next, and so on. Then the prefrontal cortex has to get out of the way. It's done its job, and it should just enjoy. It should enjoy fluid motion, as Steve has found.
It's a great program. I can tell you it works. It works with my students. I've shot my age 5 times already since I started with Steven. I'm in my 60s and hadn't done that in years. So trust me, what he says it's the gospel. Thank you.
Thank you,
Mark.
Thank you, Mark, and Merry Christmas to you. I have one last question. How does this fit into Darwin's theory of selective evolution? Since we can improve everybody's intelligence to become a peak performer.
Let me go first, Fred, then you can take it.
Good. Okay.
I don't believe in this. In this evolution, Darwin's evolution theory, when it comes to sports, because what I've seen, and I've seen it hundreds of times, is that when the mind settles down to deeper levels of silence, which every mind has the ability to do this, less thinking, less analyzing, less discriminating, the body automatically and unconsciously defaults to simpler positions and simpler motions, universal across the board, everybody. So it's not like you have to have, let's say, 100-watt light bulb to have this experience. metaphorically speaking, as far as athletic prowess or pre-athletic wiring. If you have a 50-watt bulb, because it's the nature of the mind, when it does settle down to become more powerful, the flow of intelligence into the body is more intelligent, and the body responds. The body is a slave to the mind. The body is a slave to the mind. So when you take the motherboard of the mind and you start setting up these processes that need to be set up that are completely natural, it's completely natural for the mind to want to settle down for everyone, 100% across the board. And the analogy I would give, and it's just a quick analogy, is that if you're in the library studying a boring book and you hear the voice of your best friend, it doesn't take any effort for the mind to go from something that is less charming to something that is more charming immediately. You don't know, there's no intellectual analysis. So when I set up these conditions for athletes, for the mind to naturally settle down, the body immediately becomes more efficient and starts to default to more powerful positions, even if it doesn't understand what those positions are and could explain why they're doing it. It happens automatically.
Great. If I could take another angle, that was great, Stephen. The angle is we're always growing towards more and more. And that's what Darwin is basically saying, survival of the fittest. And what Stephen is doing is giving a very simple, easy to learn, robust, reliable program to allow athletes to go towards more and more, to actually perform at their best. What we see with brain integration, we have a way that people who want to be successful in whatever area of life they're in, they can actually increase in success. Thank you very much for that question. It was very philosophical.
Let me chime in, yeah. I want to treat this not just as individuals, but I think the question was framed maybe in a collective sense. So I'm going to take it at a collective level. I reintroduced the earlier notion of dharma, spelled with a D-H-A-R-M-A, the Sanskrit word, found in ancient Indian culture. It's also found in Buddhism. It's also found in ancient China, and also Shinto in Japan. Dharma means natural tendency, alignment with natural law. So if a large group of people, let's just extend it to a community, perhaps a society, and even in terms of an ecosystem, the ecology of people around the planet, were functioning according to their natural tendency, their natural talents, their strengths, we will not have much stress. There will be kind of balancing out of the mosaic in terms of individual differences, which will render more productivity. The notion of Darwin of survival of the fittest, and I know where Stephen is coming from here, it's a very, very kind of an old basal level of response. It's part of the kind of animal nature, if you will. Human beings have a higher level of development. One of my questions coming back to me again from Victor from Africa, we have also beyond survival instincts, we can get stuck in the survival mode, but we need to get beyond that. We have these, the higher order needs, for example, Maslow talks about that in positive psychology. So we begin to access levels of our being that we didn't think we had before. And then we also discover strengths that we have. Now, the strengths are going to be different from different people. And so that will balance out in terms of an ecosystem where people are much more productive because they're naturally performing their strengths. There'll be peak performance. So survival seems like a baseline condition. It'll be much more than survival. It'll be abundance. This is my kind of prognosis, yeah, if you will. That's what Dharma means.
Yes,
yeah.
yes. Thank you so much for the insights, especially to integrate Eastern philosophy with, shall we say, Western interpretation of a very powerful theme. And I'm sure the participants have learned a lot. I have learned a lot, and I'm trying to apply some of the ideas from Fred and Steve to my grandchildren. See whether I will succeed or not. Okay, and I really appreciate the time you have given to us, the three of you, especially on the eve of Christmas and so on. And we thank all the participants who have stayed during these 1.5 hours. That means it's not just useful, but more than useful. I'm sure they'll ask for more later. And some of them will contact some of you individually. So thanks again to everyone, and Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. Take care. Yes. Thanks so much again. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yes. Yeah.